we just have different definitions of what we mean by the Christmas spirit. Like, to me, it means drinking spirits, and to them it meant something else. I don't know why I got...
David, we're back on again.
Okay.
Yeah, good evening, everybody. Welcome to another Hoops HD report coming to you here. We're recording the evening of Monday, December 28th. Actually, a pretty big day in the college basketball season, as today is the last day without any in-conference games being played at all. We are starting to get into conference play as we go through this week and into next week. But joining me tonight, first of all, my name is Chad Sherwood. We've got John Titel with us. John, how are you?
Good. After watching that Penn-Villanova game, I cannot wait for Ivy League play to start.
Well, Ivy League play, you still got a couple weeks on, actually. That's one of the last conferences to kick off. Also, John S. joining us. John, how are you doing over there?
Oh, I'm doing quite well here in David Griggs' abandoned apartment. Also getting set for Xavier's Big East opener later on this week at Villanova up at the ski lodge.
So John S. is house sitting for you, David. David, how are you doing, and why aren't you home yet? What's going on here?
Well, I'm at John's house. I mean, when I hear someone leaves home, I go there.
Yes, and I assume you had an enjoyable Christmas, David, from what you told us already.
Yeah, I was in the spirit the whole time. It was fantastic.
All right, we do have a lot to get to tonight, actually. Once a year at least, we try to do a show where we focus in on some of the rivalries out there. I know it's one of David's favorite shows because he gets to talk about a certain rivalry that we normally mute him when he discusses. But that wants to be one of our main topics tonight. We do want to talk about some of the key non-conference rivalries that are out there, which ones are the best ones, which ones we want to see coming back, which ones we want to see get started. We also do, after that, we want to focus in on a couple of conferences that we have not yet hit on in the last few weeks in depth, specifically the American, the Atlantic 10, the Mountain West. Going to take a look at a few other news and notes from the past week. Going to preview some upcoming games, so we've got a lot to get to tonight. But we want to start things off with the game of the weekend, which was the Louisville-Kentucky game. Louisville got down pretty bad, made a comeback, but wasn't quite enough, and Kentucky held on to get the victory. And David, you said today that you thought that Louisville blew the game, and I don't know how a team that makes a big comeback doesn't quite get there blows a game, so I want to give you a chance to defend yourself there.
Well, it depends on who you talk to. Of course, Louisville didn't blow the game. The analyst in me, they went into a very hostile environment. UK, it's not easy to run at Rupp Arena anyways. It's especially not easy if you're Louisville going in there. Kentucky's a really good team. They likely won't lose at home all year. Louisville built up a lead in the first half. It kind of evaporated away. A couple technical fouls, one on each coach. I think Kentucky opened it up as much as 16. Louisville came all the way back and had a chance to win. It was more impressive than not. But it's one of those games that's so gut-wrenching. It's as intense as an NCAA tournament game with hatred on top of it. So Louisville is going to feel that they blew it. They're going to look at the last two possessions and notice that they didn't convert on either one. They're going to look at blown fast break opportunities and feel had they just converted one of those, they could have tied the game or won the game. Louisville didn't blow it, but I think that from a lot of the sting, their fans feel that they did. Some of the players probably feel that they did. This game is of a different flavor, and it's not unlike other rivalries to where it's just analyzed and overanalyzed and overanalyzed. No one is going to look at it as Louisville going into a hostile environment and playing well. Their fans are going to feel like they should have won the game, and they're really disappointed that they didn't.
Well, John T., when you look at this Louisville team now, after this loss where they played well, the Michigan State loss where they played well, but if you look at the resume now, heading into conference play, their best win was against the team of the people, the Grand Canyon Antelopes, probably. What are your thoughts on this Louisville team now?
I mean, they're 11-2, and their two losses are to Michigan State and Kentucky, so I think they very deservedly should be in the top 25. Both losses away from Louisville.
But how can you defend that when the best team you've beaten is Grand Canyon?
I mean, I love the Lobes. What are you talking about?
I don't know. We love those.
It is a weak schedule, and I'm sure that it could affect them seed-wise, but when you've lost to two of the best teams in the country, that means you're going to make the tournament. You have a Hall of Fame coach. Obviously, they haven't played a single conference game, so we'll see how ACC works out. But as of now, I'm not down on Louisville. They were down by 13 with 13 minutes left on the road, and they almost won it. Like, that's a moral victory, which obviously does not get you into the tourney, but it's not a bad loss.
Well, how about from the Kentucky side? John S., let me bring you in here. Bouncing back from the Ohio State loss to get this victory, are you confident in this Kentucky team now, or do you still think there are some question marks with it?
I'm confident enough that they'll still be able to go through their SEC slate for the most part. I mean, they're still going to have some challenging games with South Carolina, with not Arkansas, but Texas A&M, LSU, Alabama, and Florida are going to be some teams to watch. But at the same time, you have to wonder about how what was a somewhat offensively flowing game had suddenly turned into one of the rock fights that Griggs had always lamented about in the final minute.
When you look at the Kentucky schedule, don't forget they do have that game at Kansas coming the end of January, so that's that gives them one more chance to get a big feather in their cap. But David, on his way off the court after the game, there is a video out there of Rick Pitino raising his hand and potentially making a gesture to the fans. Now, I don't know why a winning coach would raise his fist in triumph without doing anything else. So he's denied it, but do you think Rick Pitino flipped off the Kentucky fans?
Whether he did or not, I'm sure he wanted to. Again, there's always some sort of fallout after this game. If you want to be amazed, not in a good way, but just amazed, log on to the Kentucky and Louisville message boards right now. They are hysterical. Louisville fans are saying that it's obvious the refs were paid off, and one guy was talking about how he was going to call the FBI, and there's no doubt in my mind that someone actually did. They all think that William Wesley, also known as Worldwide Wes, who, in my opinion, was never anything more than a runner for Leon Rose, but has this mystique about him, obviously had something to do with paying off the refs, and he should be arrested. It's just nonsense. And in Kentucky, you have Pitino flipping fans off and wanting him arrested and all this other stuff. It's just way over the top. If he actually did flip the bird in an arena full of 24,000 people that hate him and basically want to catch him with his pants down, I can't believe no one got a picture of it. I guess my take is it is very easy for me to believe that he would do something like that, but if there's no actual picture of it, I have a hard time believing that he actually did it, because anything he would have done would have been overexposed and it would have caused a social media explosion.
In other words, SOP, standard operating procedure.
Yeah. and you almost think, and again, being back in that part of the country right now for Christmas, maybe I'm a little bit overexposed to it, but is it almost too much nonsense around this game? I guess we'll get to that here in a minute. But
Well, why don't we just kind of go right into that question here, because we wanted to focus it on non-conference rivalries, and that's why we started with this Louisville-Kentucky game. And the question is Louisville-Kentucky the best non-conference rivalry out there? John T., let me throw that one over to you to start. Do you think that is the best non-conference rivalry, or is there one you like better than it?
I mean, in my heart, it's Penn-Princeton, but obviously that does not have the cachet of the big ones. I kind of think Duke, North Carolina is bigger just because of the history and the amount of great talent on both sides.
Okay, but what about from a non-conference standpoint?
Sorry, non-conference, yes. I would say Kentucky-Louisville. It's unique because of the in-state rivalry game. I interviewed the director of a documentary a couple of years ago, and he said he was talking to Scott Padgett, so they win that title in '98, but they had lost in the regular season in Louisville. So Padgett comes back to the state, and he sees these Louisville fans mocking him wearing shirts, number 1 in the country, number 2 in the state. It is fierce.
Yeah, that's a line they've probably lifted from Cincinnati, where UC was, number 1 going into the 96-97 season, and then the former radio voice for Xavier, Andy McWilliams, had said after the broadcast that Cincinnati was #1 in the country and #2 in the city of Cincinnati.
Yeah. That's a good one, too. We'll get to that. I guess it comes down to how do you define what a good rivalry is. I think it's one of the most bitter rivalries, but in some ways, does that make it the best? I must say, and I realize it was dormant for 22 years, I was stunned by the level of the intensity between Maryland and Georgetown. And unlike Louisville, Kentucky, this year it was a good game, but a lot of the times it's not. A lot of the times Louisville and Kentucky is extremely sloppy. I don't know if it's nerves. I don't know if it's just bitterness or what, but Maryland and Georgetown was an extremely well-played, high-level, high-emotional, high-intensity game. Which is something that the Louisville-Kentucky game, maybe not this year, but in most years kind of lacks as far as it being a well-played game. Illinois-Missouri is another one that it just seems like, with the exception of this year, where it just didn't matter at all, that's just always this highly charged, highly well-played, hold-on-to-your-seat type of game that feels every bit as intense as a lot of conference games and even more intense than a lot of conference games. I don't know. How do you define what is a good rivalry?
You see, my problem with Maryland Georgetown is because it was so dormant. Can you really call that a great non-conference rivalry? I really think when it comes to intensity, that Xavier Cincinnati rivalry that John S. was just referencing is right up there, probably right behind Louisville, Kentucky, in my mind, as the second best one. John S., I assume you agree with me, or maybe you even have it as your #1.
No, it's always the hallmark of a good rivalry when both teams are sent to their corner for 2 years and told to make nice downtown at US Bank Arena before they went back to on-campus sites and actually went back to calling it the Crosstown Shootout instead of the PC Crosstown Classic.
Right. I mean, I think that's the other thing that I always look at, and John T., this is really right up your wheelhouse, is anything in the Big Five. I mean, Temple, Villanova, Villanova, St. Joe's, Penn against Villanova. I guess we're not talking about that today, but
Yeah.
But in terms of 5 teams or even 6 teams, if you want to include Drexel, that may be as good as it gets, but it's not really just 2 teams. It's a lot bigger.
It is, and I'm biased due to my Penn roots, but yeah, it's a very unique situation where you have 5 or 6 schools from the same city that have been around forever and played each other forever. You also can't discount the location, with the Palestra being college basketball's most historic gymnasium and the site of what used to be doubleheaders. They're actually bringing it back this year, as this is the 60th anniversary of the Big Five. And on January 20th, we're going to see St. Joe's against Penn and Temple against LaSalle. I've heard stories back in the day. People would show up and they'd be lines out the door and crowded up to the top of the rafters. And it's just a very special circumstance based on the city and the gym.
John T., you'll have to kind of back me up here because I don't know all the specific facts, just some of the general happenings. But I think Joe's Nova is considered the signature rivalry, but Temple Villanova seems to be the one, at least administratively, that's the most intense. It seems like they're always stabbing each other in the back one way or another, and it's just great fun from the outsider. I mean, especially from my vantage point.
That goes back to that midnight game. I think it's been ever since that midnight game that they've hated each other more than anything.
I don't think they liked each other too much before that, but that certainly didn't help. Villanova was wanting to move up in football, and again, not knowing the specific, they were considering transitioning up to football in the FBS, and they wanted to use, was it Lincoln Financial, wherever it is the Eagles play, which is where Temple was playing at the time, and I think still does. Temple said, no, we're not sharing it. Tough crap. And it's the back and forth between those institutions is phenomenal. And then coupled with it, and again, John will be able to speak to the history better than I can to this. Didn't Villanova kind of break up the Big Five for a bit? They stopped playing everybody every year.
There was definitely some downtime. I think I agree that St. Joe's against Nova was one of, if not the biggest part of the rivalry. I think, to be honest, I'm not sure, but I think that religion actually had something to do with that, as they are very religious schools, whereas Penn is just some private university full of these elitist kids. But I think it's just, they've also had amazing players. Like, it's one thing to have some great rivalry with players you're never going to see again, back in the day, you'd see guys from Villanova and Temple and St. Joe's like play in the NBA and make All-Star games. So this was like kind of your first sign of them, and they would live in the same city and face off each other during the summer and summer league play, and it was just like a familial atmosphere with these elements of like intensity and ferocity against your opponents.
And there's also St. Joe's and Temple, and I know where David Griggs is going to go with this. He likes to talk about Navy's chant, "I believe we will win," but Temple has also come off with a nice little tangent of their own.
Yeah, I believe the Hawk is dead.
I believe the Hawk is dead. Yeah, I got to give Temple credit. That was pretty good. But John S., a couple other rivalries we do want to get to here. And I think it was a great game this year. It's been pretty good for this Iowa State-Iowa rivalry. Do you rank that up there with some of these other big ones?
Well, it's one of those things that we don't necessarily know about very much because the Big Four in Iowa consists of Iowa, Iowa State, Northern Iowa, and also Drake, which hasn't been to the Final Four in almost half a century. But there are some well-played rivalry games between those four programs. And then we also have a similar series in Indiana known as the Crossroads Classic, where Indiana, Purdue, Butler, and Notre Dame will mix it up. I'd love to see a similar series in Ohio take place, possibly between Ohio State and Cincinnati and Xavier and Dayton in another half.
Yeah, we want to get to that Ohio stuff in a bit here.
Yeah, but the Cy-Hawk Trophy, I think that's what Iowa State and Iowa play for. All you need to know about this rivalry, is oh yeah, that's the football. Is this. Iowa State was at home against an unranked Iowa team. Iowa State is ranked second in the country. They're expected to clobber Iowa. They have to come from way back. They barely win the game, and they stormed the court. The second-ranked team in the country stormed the court against an out-of-conference unranked opponent. I've never even heard of that happening before. But, I mean, watching that happen, I was just sort of jaw on the floor. Wow, that one's big. That one's really big.
It helps when you have to come back from 20 points down in order to get a win against your cross-state rival.
Yeah.
Well, John T., I guess something else that is moving into the non-conference rivalry is some of these old schools, the best Big East conferences. We're seeing matchups such as Syracuse, Georgetown, St. John's against some of these schools. UConn versus Georgetown or UConn versus Syracuse. I mean, are these looked at as being great non-conference rivalries now that they're no longer a conference game?
They are, but it's weird. Like as you pointed out, like the whole point of the rivalry existing as a non-conference rivalry is that it started as a conference rivalry, and then money and TV networks and greedy administrations changed it. So it's hard to say how it compares. I mean, Syracuse Georgetown is a special place in DC's heart because during the 80s we had these amazing coaches with Boeheim and the first John Thompson and these amazing players like Patrick Ewing and Pearl Washington, and the Big East would have like 3 teams in the Final Four in '85. It was just a big deal around the nation. It just happened to be in the Big East, and now that it's broken up, and I think it's going to continue to splinter as we get older and older. It's definitely lost something, but the fact that they still play it makes it a big deal because all the alumni remember what it was like back in the day.
And there was also DePaul in the 80s, even though they weren't in the Big East at that time. That was another fixture game on Georgetown's schedule back then, but the Hoyas were usually winning those games back then.
David, how about out west, a couple rivalries here. The Holy War between BYU, Utah. We could also talk a little Colorado, Colorado State.
Yeah. BYU, Utah is surprisingly. I mean, it is. The venom is at an extremely high, almost Louisville, Kentucky-ish level. Now, for years, it was a conference game. They played each other in football. They played each other in basketball twice a year. I heard some amazing stat that over the course of 250, 290, however many games, 10 points separated the two teams total. I don't know. That's not exactly right, but it's approximately right. Those two really, really hate each other, and although BYU being the Latter-day Saints, it's Mormon in Utah isn't. Apparently, religion, there is that underflow of almost, I think that fuels a lot of fire to the rivalry, and there's a lot of zealousness around that one. I'm glad they kept it going as much as they hate each other, and believe me, they really, really do. They both understand that there's something to be gained from keeping that going. It is going to come back in football. It continues to be played in basketball. There was some talk, I think, at the end of the last year, because the contract was up, that they weren't going to continue it, or that there was talk of just moving it to Salt Lake City permanently and splitting the tickets. But I love this game. I'm glad they kept it going. It's not the same when it's not a conference game, because you never have the stakes of, if we win this, we get in third place, or we're tied in the standings, or you just don't have those stakes or those storylines. But as far as bitter bragging rights, I don't think the venom has subsided at all with these two being in different conferences.
John S., I got one more for you here. This is one that really has gotten good the last few years, and that's the, I guess we call it the Battle of Rhode Island, between Providence and Rhode Island. You being our Big East guy.
Yeah, Providence and Rhode Island has been one of those regional rivalries that's taken place, I think, even before the days of the Eastern Eight, where Rhode Island was an original member. But Rhode Island had a stretch in the 90s and 2000s where they dominated the rivalry, but lately Providence has had the upper hand, although, as we saw last year, Providence did stumble a bit against Boston College and even Brown, but thankfully that has not been the case this year.
Let me just run through a couple others that I want to point out, and then I'll ask if anybody else has any others out there right now that you want to bring up. But a couple others. These are more football rivalries, but they do get played in basketball. Clemson, South Carolina, Georgia, Georgia Tech.
Yeah.
Florida State's been a really good game the last couple of years, and that's coming up tomorrow night, in fact. One other that I personally love in terms of a non-conference rivalry, it's very under the radar, is Lipscomb and Belmont at the Battle of the Boulevard down there in Nashville. But John T., any other really great rivalries that we haven't brought up yet that you're thinking of?
I mean, sentimentally, I have to mention Penn-Princeton. It is the third oldest consecutively played rivalry in Division I, and they were the two best teams in Ivy League for decades. So it's one thing if you have Columbia and Cornell battling for 7th place, but these guys are right at the top. And the fact that there is no current Ivy League postseason tourney makes it even more important, because it's one thing if Penn sweeps Princeton in the regular season and then gets upset in the conference tourney, but winning games in the regular season counts. And, of course, the one that will always haunt me, my senior year in '96, Princeton won the one-game playoff, and it really ruined my entire March.
David, any others that you're thinking of?
We kind of mentioned this already, but it's interesting, the Crossroads Classic. Now, again, Indiana and Purdue are obviously conference rivals, so and I know the focal point here, but with Butler and Notre Dame coming in, I'm glad they got that going. It's always a pretty good event. What's interesting about that is that most of the venom seems to be aimed at Butler. I mean, Indiana and Purdue hate each other, and it's more of an annoying hate. Like, they're just more annoyed by Butler than it is, BYU, Utah, Louisville, Kentucky, to where it's just this extreme hate towards each other. But that one's kind of interesting that they've got that one going. And again, I gotta throw it out there. You alluded to it. I love the Front Range. It's a mythical conference. Love the Front Range.
Yeah, it's another mythical grouping here, like the Big Four, like the Big Five. I guess we could throw there the Western New York Big Four with Niagara, Canisius, Buffalo, St. Bonaventure. Very under the radar-ish, but a pretty nice. They got some pretty good rivalries out there. But let's turn to the other half of the question here, which is, what rivalries do we want either to see back or to see getting started? And let's start with the elephant in the room, because David, if we don't get to you, you're going to be screaming about it all
night. The shark in the room?
The shark in the room, whatever you want to call it. David, what rivalry is gone that you need to see back?
The border war. The border war needs to come back. It started, again, I am not really a fan of either team, but it really was, I don't know how you rate, how big is the rivalry, how good is the rivalry. Well, it started, again, the Civil War. There was, the Jayhawks and the Tigers were two militias that, while both on the Union side, fought against each other. Kansas and Missouri hated each other as states. And, the Civil War ends in 1865. In 1891, there was the first football game. It's very probable, even likely, that members of the Tigers and the Jayhawks who had at one time been shooting at each other were at that first football game and at those first couple of games. I love that Kansas is called the Jayhawks. I love that Missouri is called the Tigers. They both took on the names of those militias. In 1907, they played in basketball. They played at least once a year, every year, all the way up until Missouri left for the SEC. I don't know. I don't think that there was anything more spirited. I don't think there was anything more bitter. I just think that it was a tremendous rivalry, both in sports and both, the history of the area and how the schools got there. I think it's a damn shame that they didn't keep it going. Kansas is saying that the rivalry is too good to not be to just play it out of conference. It needs to be a conference game. Missouri's saying that it's worth keeping going even if it's not a conference game. I think they're both right. I think they're both wrong. I really, really wish something could have been done to preserve it. If it is brought back, it would be great. They should play. I would enjoy it. But they're right. It's not the same. It's not a conference game anymore. It's not home and home anymore. And it doesn't date back to 1891 the way it used to. It's been stopped. But still, there is nobody that either school could play out of conference that would generate more venom and more buzz than that one. It's a shame. It really is a shame that they don't play.
Well, John T., I think if there is one matchup that could generate close to that buzz, it might be the backyard brawl between West Virginia and Pitt. Another dead rivalry that realignment killed for us.
Yeah, I mean, the football rivalry is pretty fierce, and they do have a great history with some great coaches in Huggins and Dixon. I agree that geography is very important, like David said with border war and like that, which is why living in D.C. and having seen the Big Five in Philly, there's just so many good teams in D.C. that are a subway right away. Why don't we get some 14 tournament every year? Or just a doubleheader with Maryland and Georgetown and GW and American or whoever, bring them in, and if you want to sub in Howard or another team every so often, like they're all right here. People want to see them play. What's the harm?
I agree. Georgetown, GW would love to see. I mean, these are absolute games I think need to get going. And John S., I know you're an Ohio guy, so a couple times already this season, but the fact that Ohio State doesn't play anybody else in the state of Ohio during the regular season, not even Youngstown State or Cleveland State or Wright State, let alone Cincinnati, Xavier, Dayton. Do we need to get something going here with Ohio State, and will it ever happen?
Well, we're seeing one of the alternatives this year when they're losing to Texas Arlington and Louisiana Tech and pissing off the natives who are not really showing up that much to their out-of-conference games at the Schottenstein Center. But as I mentioned earlier, they could play a series of games either at Nationwide Arena downtown in Columbus or at US Bank Arena in Cincinnati, where you could rotate between Ohio State, Cincinnati, Xavier, and Dayton, and possibly some other Ohio teams. I mean, you can't have the Crosstown Shootout played in Columbus, for example, but even if it's not an exempt event, you can still have a doubleheader that would probably sell out among some of the natives in Ohio.
Well, that's kind of outrageous because you have Cincinnati and Xavier who are both in the rankings. You have Dayton who has been inside the bubble and advanced in the tournament the last 2 years. That's 45 minutes up the road, if that. And Cincinnati and Cincinnati and Xavier do play. I think they'll continue to play. Neither of them play Dayton, and none of those three play Ohio State. Those are the big four teams. You have four teams, albeit maybe not Ohio State this year, that are no stranger to the rankings and no stranger to being inside the bubble. Why not play? Like exactly what John Teitel said about D.C. Why doesn't Georgetown and George Washington play? Why didn't Maryland and Georgetown play for over 2 decades? What do people have against playing good competition that isn't that far away? I mean, these regional teams should play each other.
Right, and I'm talking teams within the same state, or even teams that are near each other but in different states. And one of the big ones that was one of the best rivalries we had non-conference for years was Kentucky-Indiana. Another series that's dead now.
That's outrageous. Again, not knowing the exact specifics, I don't want to step on anyone's toes. They used to alternate between Indianapolis and Louisville. It was a neutral site game that rotated between those two cities. It was moved to campus sites, so it would be at Rupp Arena and Assembly Hall. There was talk of moving the game permanently to Indianapolis and playing it in the football stadium, which really would have been a unique setting. I think it was actually Kentucky's idea to do this, or John Calipari's. They would set it up much like they set up the Final Four and sell, basically attempt to sell 50 or 60,000 tickets. You could fit all of Rupp Arena and all of Assembly Hall into the RCA Dome, so why not just play it in the RCA Dome every year? Indiana didn't like that. They liked the home and home, and it just was not worked out, and it hasn't been resumed since, and what a shame. Again, you can play a rivalry in a football stadium in front of 60,000 people, and you're not doing it. I don't get it. Oh, God.
John T., are there any other big rivalries that are not being played that you'd like to see get going here?
Besides the DC ones, I mean, now that we have these up-and-coming programs like the Lopes, I mean, I don't think that people are going to have record ratings for ASU against the Lopes. But again, like, the geography makes a lot of sense to me. I assume that people will go to Grand Canyon just to see the local Sun Devils play. I don't know if I think people would come up a couple hours from Tucson to see the Wildcats play. I would get the Lopes a little in-state action in Arizona.
Yeah.
You're not even mentioning Grand Canyon in northern Arizona, which is actually the closest university to the real Grand Canyon.
Yeah,
I did a little research into this. 3 teams that notably came out to me as not playing any in-state rivals were Ohio State, Grand Canyon, and the third was NJIT, another program that, I mean, their campus is within walking distance of the Prudential Center in Newark. Why aren't they playing Seton Hall?
Right.
Why aren't they playing a Monmouth, somebody like that? That's another rivalry that I think I'd like to see get going. I guess the other half of it is some of these old conference rivalries. Do we need to get them back, David? Like Texas A&M, Syracuse, UConn, and the like.
Oh, absolutely. Texas A&M. It's kind of funny because they both play most of their out-of-conference games in front of a half-empty house. They were to schedule each other, it would sell out in a nanosecond. They could play it in Houston and sell it out. They could play it in Dallas and sell it out. They could play it home and sell it out. It's outrageous that those two teams that probably need to increase the level of interest in their programs in November and December could easily do so, yet don't do so. I don't know. It frustrates the hell out of me when people are so stubborn because of such ill feelings or whatever that they don't do what's in their best interest. Texas and Texas A&M should absolutely play. I mean, shouldn't they?
I think they should. John S., your thoughts on anybody else that should be playing?
I'll give you a couple of under-the-radar rivalries we haven't really mentioned. We talked about West Virginia and Pitt, but West Virginia and Virginia Tech, there's also quite a bit of bad blood between those two teams. And then as far as the state of Utah goes, they used to have, I think, what was called the Ochre Bucket that involved Utah, BYU, Utah State, Weber State, and then Southern Utah State. That's not including Utah Valley, who is the most recent addition to Division I in the Beehive State.
Well, actually, West Virginia and Vodtech do still play. They're playing later this week. In fact, they're playing Wednesday.
They brought that back in basketball. They have not played football. And West Virginia are going to get started. What do you think, just real quick, Chad, about what Wisconsin has been doing, what Virginia does, to a degree what the Iowa schools have done, about playing what Louisville has done with Western Kentucky, about playing under-the-radar teams that are successful at a lower level on equal terms? Do you like that or not? I personally love it. I think Virginia gets far more out of it than they would otherwise just playing some other crap buy game.
Well, absolutely. I think that if you're going to play 7 or 8 of these crap games, why are you playing Ohio State versus Texas Arlington? Why aren't you not playing Ohio State versus Wright State? Why are you not playing somebody local, somebody that'll generate interest, somebody that'll bring more fans to the game, even if it's going to be fans from the other schools that are showing up and buying tickets? It's going to be something that's going to generate interest and generate excitement around the game versus you having these arenas in November with nobody showing up. Well, who wants to show up when Cal State Northridge is playing a game at Syracuse? I mean, nobody knows what Cal State Northridge is unless you're one of us.
Right.
So I think you should play those games.
And I like that Virginia goes on the road and does it home and home. Now, again, the backlash to that is Virginia opened at George Washington. They lost the game, and they're going to have to shut their program down. They had everything to lose, nothing to gain. They lost everything, and they've had to cancel the rest of the season and start over again.
No wonder Joby's not with us anymore.
That's such crap. And again, I'll pick on Ohio State here. If they were to go to Wright State or Ohio, Cleveland State, the way Virginia does, 50% of the stadium at least would be for Ohio State, and it's a winnable road game. It helps your numbers. And in the event that they do lose it, who cares? It fades into the background. Nobody is even going to care that GW beat Virginia by the time it's all over.
Now, if my recollection is correct, the last time Ohio State did go on the road to an in-conference foe was at Toledo when they lost in 1999.
Yeah,
I think that was the same year they actually went to the Final Four, but was later vacated.
Yeah.
Now you see that, so if you play an in-state rivalry, you go to the Final Four. John, one other in-state rivalry we did miss that we definitely need to discuss happened in the NCAA tournament last year, finally, Kansas and Wichita State. How much of a crime is it that these two teams do not play?
It's a sizable crime. I wish that they play every year. I wish they'd bring in the the Kansas State Wildcats and have it be like a triple header, or bring in whoever else in Kansas, or even nearby. We can make it a border battle extended and bring in Missouri. No, it's Big Brother is often scared of Little Brother because they figure there's little to gain and everything to lose. Anybody who saw the Michigan State-Oakland game knows that Michigan State probably does not want to schedule Oakland anytime soon.
That's a great point. That's another one of those regional rivalries against the little guy. You're not playing on your home court, but it does come out as a win. Michigan State had a little bit of extenuating circumstances with that game, I think. But David, I know you wanted to also discuss a little bit about non-conference scheduling here. We do want to move things along, but I guess the question that kind of feeds out of what we were just discussing here is, in terms of non-conference scheduling, is it better to schedule these regional rivals, schedule a bunch of cupcakes and wins, like Long Beach State does, and play 8 road games against the top 8 teams in the country?
My opinion is you kind of want a nice salad. You don't want all lettuce. You don't want all carrots. I mean, you kind of want a little bit of everything on there. I think one of the problems with college basketball is that we've lost a lot of our regional and traditional rivalries in conference play, and we've kind of alienated the casual fan by doing that. But the other problem is that 70% of the games in November and December are absolutely horrible. They are huge mismatches that no one is interested in. I understand scheduling a couple of bye games. I like how Virginia does it. I think they have 2 or 3 on their schedule because, if for no other reason, there's kids on your team that will probably not get to play in any other game, at least not significantly, other than those. I think Long Beach State overdoes it somewhat because you want to challenge yourself but not overwhelm yourself. But how do you schedule? I love how Virginia does it. I love that they play a smattering of regional teams. I love that they play those teams away from home. And I like that they play really tough out-of-conference competition on a national level, and they have a smattering of bye games as well. I think that is the perfect way to schedule if you're a power program. If you're not a power program, if you're in a league that typically doesn't get but 1 or 2 bids like the Atlantic 10, I do think you need to step it up a bit. A team like St. Mary's did absolutely nothing for themselves, and if they lose 4 games, that's probably 4 too many, because even if you win 26 or 27, if 23 of them are against non-NIT teams, then all you've done is proven you can beat sub-NIT teams.
Well, John T., do you think maybe the NCAA should step in here and say, hey, listen, everybody's got to schedule a minimum number of true road games? You're looking at teams like Kentucky, 2 true non-conference road games. Same thing with Louisville. I think St. Mary's with 1. I mean, isn't
Texas
that
Tech 0.
Texas Tech 0?
No. If it was just a computer making up the selection committee every March, then yes. But the fact is, there's human beings who read data on every single team. I talked to committee member and Northeastern athletic director Peter Roby about this last March. I asked him, what's the deal with scheduling? He said, a couple things. Number one, quality of the opponent is important. If you have a weak conference, you should schedule good non-conference opponents, and vice versa. If you're playing in the ACC, the Big Ten, you don't need to schedule everybody from other Power 5 teams out of conference. Also understand it's hard to win regardless of the conference you're in on the road, regardless of strong conference or weak conference. Additionally, while the quality of your schedule is important, there's other factors. If you're bringing in a bunch of freshmen and lost all your seniors, the committee will understand if you scheduled a couple of cupcakes in November. Additionally, sometimes you schedule these things a couple of years in advance. You shouldn't get penalized for looking into a crystal ball and guessing that Monmouth is going to be good or bad, for example.
And meanwhile, I'm sitting here in Big East country watching a team that hit the jackpot as far as how they scheduled. They had a few bye games to pad their record a little bit. Wright State, Miami, Western Kentucky, had a rivalry game with Cincinnati, had an exempt tournament where they also hit the jackpot, and of course that would be the Xavier Musketeers. And yes, let's also throw in a couple of road games at Michigan as part of the Big Ten Big East Challenge and the rivalry game with Wake Forest with the Skip Prosser Classic.
Is there anybody else that any of you want to specifically commend or chastise for what they did this year in their non-conference schedules?
Pitt could have done a little bit better. Louisville could have scheduled they scheduled 2 teams that will contend for 1 seeds and a bunch of teams that will be watching any and all basketball in March on TV because they won't even make the CBI. They could have scheduled a little smarter. I realize that Kentucky, Western Kentucky are fixture games, but you look at that situation, and I understand what John Titel just said about situations. To me, Louisville feeling like they have to play X number of home games at the Yum Center because of the contract they have there, I'm just not ready to cut them a break for that. You play who you play, and they have played no one and they've beaten no one. And had they stepped it up a little bit, they'd probably be in much better shape and a lot more prepared going into conference play. Texas Tech, Lubbock's a great place, but maybe they should consider leaving it every once in a while.
They're going to have to at some point with conference play at least. But we want to get into go through a few conferences that we have not hit on in depth in the last few weeks. Just try to do them quickly. We're running a little late on time here, but we haven't spoken much American basketball recently. And Cincinnati over this past week lost another heartbreaker to Iowa State at the buzzer. John S., you being our Cincinnati guy.
Excuse me while I go get a drink since we're going to be talking about the American.
Okay. Well, John S. left. He's gone. John T., your thoughts on the Cincinnati team? Is there anything you're worried about that you can't win these close games at the buzzer, or is it just 2 heartbreakers?
No, they're heartbreakers.
Sorry, John. Go ahead.
They are heartbreakers, but you're losing to teams like Butler and Xavier and Iowa State, and one of them, I think the Butler one, was on a buzzer beater by Roosevelt Jones, and they're very respectable losses. The team's great, defense amazing, 61 a game allowed, top 20 in the nation. If you're losing to Southeastern Louisiana and Arkansas Pine Bluff by a single point or something, push the panic button. They're going to be fine.
Well, I personally believe that if you're a really good team, you find ways to win these close games, and that's my concern with Cincinnati, that they're not finding ways to win these close games. But David, another team over the American is this UConn team. Are they any good or not, or do we just not know yet?
I've still got some question marks on them. I do think that they are good.
Now, and Amita Brima is out for 6 weeks, by the way. That's the other big news coming out of UConn.
Yeah. I don't. I wish Lee was here so I could talk about how they're not good, but I think that they are. They have the win over Michigan. I don't know how far that's going to carry them. It was on a neutral floor. They ended up losing the other two games by a total of 6 points. And like you said, you have to come to the table with more than games that you almost won. The problem with UConn, they go to Texas. I think if they win that one, they'll get a lot of credit for it. They have Georgetown a little bit later in the year, but other than that, there isn't anything that really puts a high caliber signature win on their profile. There's opportunities for decent notable wins, at Tulsa, at Houston, at Memphis, but they're not playing a whole lot of teams that are likely to land safely inside the bubble, and when you don't have that many big wins going into a schedule like that, your margin for error is small. I think that they're good enough to get inside the bubble. I think they ultimately will. But, again, not having any big wins other than Michigan is a little concerning because the margin for error is smaller for them.
Well, I noticed, David, that you didn't even give them a chance to pick up a big win by beating SMU. So let me throw it over to John S.
I forgot about
SMU sitting here still undefeated. A nice win over Colorado out in Las Vegas this past week. Larry Brown back now. Does what SMU is doing even matter this season?
Well, I think it matters not so much for the fans as it does for some of the players on the team, because not everyone is going to be leaving after the season, so you still want to leave somewhat of a mark for your program and for whatever tradition you can carry. But I do find it odd that SMU is not going to be able to participate in the postseason while Hawaii was able to actually have their postseason ban deferred until next season. And if you saw Hawaii this weekend over Christmas, they might have a shot, albeit a small one.
I would think they need to win the Big West tournament to get in, but I think that one of the key differences, personally, I think the key difference here is that Hawaii's ban actually came mid-season versus SMU's came before the season. Maybe that was a consideration here by the NCAA, but John Teitel, let me ask you about another team here. Going into the season, you and I were both kind of on the Tulsa bandwagon. Are we off of it now?
Yes, that is run off the road and run off the rails. When you're losing at home to Oral Roberts, there's just no good way to sugarcoat it. The other three single-digit losses to South Carolina, Arkansas, Little Rock, and Oregon State, those three teams are a combined 30-3, so I can live with single-digit losses to those. The other thing is the ridiculous bad luck they've had. Opponents against Tulsa this year shooting almost 78% from the free throw line, number one in the nation. That's got to come down at some point, right?
Well, is it a problem that would that be it? I mean, we know what Arizona State's home crowd does for free throw defense. Maybe they need their own curtain of distraction. But, David, we got a couple of teams with nice records here in Memphis and Houston. Are these frauds, though?
Yeah. Well, I think Houston is largely because they've just. I think 200 teams would have that same record against the schedule. I'm a little bit higher on Memphis, but I don't think they have what it takes to get to the postseason tournament. And yeah, just to follow up a little bit on Tulsa, some of the bad luck they're having. Good grief! Take a look at this. This is their coach. Anyway, that's some of the bad luck that Tulsa is experiencing right now. Just tough break all the way around for the Hurricane.
I will say this for Memphis, though. They at least gave themselves a few chances with Ohio State, Ole Miss, and to some extent South Carolina. Had they been able to beat the Rebels at home, they would at least have somewhat of a case to make for an at-large. But the way things are playing out, they could still give themselves a chance if they're able to knock the Gamecocks and Angry Frank from the ranks of the unbeaten. Houston, on the other hand, they're a complete fraud at the moment.
Well, let me throw it over to John T. The other remaining teams of the conference, Temple, East Carolina, Central Florida, Tulane, South Florida. Is there anything even worth discussing about this group?
Nope.
Okay. And is this a two-bid league? Does anyone want to make a case for three?
Unless SMU wins some sort of appeal.
Okay. Well, let's move on to the Atlantic 10. And Dyshawn Pierre has not yet played, but I believe, and John S., you can correct me on this, that he is now possibly ready to play by the time of the Dayton's next game.
He was practicing prior to their game against Miami, which is actually one of those mythical Miami Valley Conference games where the Flyers survived at home with a last-second shot, but he should be ready to go for their next game, which I think is going to be against Arkansas at home.
Okay, and how much do you think his return is going to actually help the team?
Well, he'll probably get about 10 to 20 minutes in the return game right here. It really depends on how much practice time he's been able to log. But with the Christmas break going on right now, they have basically unlimited time in order to practice. So it's almost like a second fall practice for all the teams in NCAA right now.
Beyond Dayton, one of the stunners out of the Atlantic 10, David, was what George Washington did at DePaul.
Yes, thank you for that.
I think
that's
even DePaul's head coach Dave Lato said he kept waiting for GW to make the run, and they never did. I mean, when the other coach expected to lose, even when he was up big, that says something.
It was kind of shocking because George Washington is a team that they've looked good all year long with the exception of that game. They had the big win against Virginia early on, but since then, their only loss was to Cincinnati. It was a really close game. They had that win against Tennessee. I really thought a lot of them. They just looked awful in that one. I still think that they're safe as far as a bid goes if they can blow through conference play and avoid bad losses, but that one was kind of a head scratcher, and it kind of makes me reevaluate what they've done. They sweat out Penn State, they sweat out St. Peter's. They didn't really blow them out either. They blew out Rutgers, but that's easy to do.
Yeah, everyone blows out Rutgers,
Rutgers.
John T., how about this Richmond team? Is this a team that we've just kind of been almost ignoring that we need to start paying attention to?
We've definitely been ignoring them. We don't need to pay attention to them yet, but we need to keep an eye on the future. Their next three: at Texas Tech, host St. Joe's, at Rhode Island, all top 75 teams. So we're going to learn a lot about them. If you have not heard of Terry Allen, check him out. He had 34-13 in a win over Cal. Richmond could be for real, but the next couple weeks we're going to find out for sure.
John S., how about St. Joe's or Davidson, both sitting here with 9-2 record for St. Joe's, 8-2 for Davidson. You told us that a couple teams in the American were frauds. Are we a couple frauds here as well?
Well, Davidson has been a fraud so far. If you saw their game against Pitt at Madison Square Garden about a week ago, St. Joe's has recovered somewhat nicely after losing at home to Villanova and also dropping a game. I think it was against either Purdue or Florida, but
Florida,
they should have a chance to put together a decent 8-10 conference record, which would also put them in the discussion for an NCAA tournament bid. But I think St. Joe's has more star power with DeAndre Bembry, though.
David, how about Fordham, Duquesne, both sitting here with some of their best records I've seen at this point in the season in quite a while?
Yeah, I think that both are very much improved and that they're good enough to make a little bit of noise in the conference, but not really. I don't. If either of these teams makes the NIT, I will be very impressed. I don't think they're going to be relevant as far as the NCAA tournament goes, but very good seasons that they're having, and they're going in the right direction. I think they're doing what they need to do to get their programs back on track, or on track in the case of both of them. They were never
on track.
Yeah.
Duquesne is going to have an injury issue, though, with one of their guards, Derek Coulter, who is out for the season right now. I mean, prior to his injury, they did have one of the better backcourts in the Atlantic 10, but going into conference play, it's going to be uphill without Coulter able to go.
And John Titel, how about the rest of the Atlantic 10? VCU, who we kind of liked heading into the season, Rhode Island, St. Bonaventure, UMass, George Mason, LaSalle, St. Louis. Anybody here that is worth discussing?
Just quickly, Rhode Island, I want to like them because they lost very close to Valpo and Providence, but E.C. Matthews is already done for the year, and Hassan Martin just hurt his left ankle last week, so I think they've just been bitten too big by the injury bug.
And how many bids do you think we're getting? John, I'll stick with you. How many bids is Atlantic 10?
Dayton and GW are in. Everyone else is bubblicious.
Do you think there's going to be 3 at the end of the day, or do you think it's going to just be the 2?
I'm leaning to. I would not sleep on St. Joe's because, as John S. said, and they have Bembry. Keep an eye on Isaiah Miles as well. He's a 6'7" guy, averaging 17 points and 8 boards a game. He's a monster. He had 36 and 15 in a win over VTech. So Bembry finally had some help.
David, you want to respond?
I agree with the 2. I'm not as big on St. John's. I could see Richmond sneaking up there. I like them a little bit, so I would put the ceiling. It's just Davidson's got a bloated record against weak teams. Whenever they played anybody decent, they have been blown out of the place. I like how St. Joe's has played in the sense that I thought they were awful and wasn't expecting them to be as good as they've been. I don't know if they're NCAA tournament good. VCU has been really kind of disappointing, especially when they played so well in some of those games against Duke and whatnot. But really, I think 3 is what they're getting.
Very quickly, I want to touch on the Mountain West. A couple pieces of news actually out of the Mountain West this week. One is that the conference tournament beginning next year is going to drop down from 11 teams to only 8. The other piece of news came out of the David Collette situation at Utah State. He's transferred over to Utah. I believe he has to kind of pay for himself for a semester there, but the drama there is done. John S., anything you take away from either of those pieces of news, especially the conference tournament issue? Do you like that format of only 8? Do you think they should be at everybody at 11?
I think it gives a little more incentive just to send the top 8, but that's not good news if you're San Jose State, Nevada, Reno, or Wyoming in a season like this.
Did they give a reason, Chad, for only I don't understand this for a league.
The reason that I read was simply we wanted to reward the regular season more, so we're only going to have the top 8. It may have also come down to a facility issue here. It's 1 less day of the tournament, 2 less days when they play the women's tournament at the same site as well at the same time. But
at the Thomas and Mack Center.
Right. John T., in terms of the Mountain West, UNLV, Boise State, San Diego State kind of leading the way. Do you feel any of these teams could be inside the bubble, or are we looking at a one-bid league here?
We're looking at a one-bid league. I mean, in Boise State's defense, they have a 2-point loss at Montana and 3 losses away from home to Arizona twice and Michigan State once. They're playing good teams and just coming up short. Good offense, average defense, and I like UNLV. I just think they're a little young and they've had some roster turnover. I'm thinking one bid.
David, the rest of the Mountain West, anybody that you're looking at, New Mexico, who had gotten a little bit of attention, went 0-3 out of the Diamond Head. The rest of the teams, Fresno, Nevada, Colorado State, Wyoming, San Jose State Air Force. Anybody that you think could make any noise at all in this conference?
Not really. It's been San Diego State's been really disappointing. I was actually expecting a little more out of Boise. John T. already talked about them. Utah State had the key player lost. It's just been a really disappointing league, and it wasn't that long ago, just 3 or 4 years ago, when half the league or more looked like that they were in position to make the NCAA tournament. It was outperforming some of the BCS/power conferences at the time. It's kind of disappointing to see it fall the way that it has, but I think that they will get. I think whoever finishes first will be inside the bubble, at least if it's UNLV or Boise. But I don't think that it's. I mean, unless someone other than them wins the conference tournament, I think it is a one-bid league. This is the poorest we have seen the Mountain West probably ever since it broke away from the WAC. This is really, really poor.
John T., bring you back in here. A couple other games we want to go over the past week. Besides the Louisville-Kentucky game, the other wins of note came from Oklahoma, who won the Diamond Head Classic, but struggled with both Hawaii and Harvard. Are you worried at all about this Oklahoma team?
Absolutely not. Harvard is not on the level of Oklahoma, but is a solid team that's been to 4 straight NCAA tournaments. Hawaii had a little home court advantage. Oklahoma's offense is still great, 87 points a game. The defense, which is surprising me, I hope everyone else, maybe it's just me, they're only allowing 36% from the field, top 10 in the nation. This team is going to be just fine.
I personally agree with you. As John S., as you know, Oklahoma is currently my pick to win it all, in fact. But John S., Xavier had a very lousy first half against Wake this past week as well. Are you worried about them after the way they played that first half, or are you more glad about the way they bounced back in the second half and were able to hold on to win the game?
I'm actually more glad they were able to come back from, 18 down, because they hadn't really been tested in that many games in the non-conference, with the exception of Michigan, with Cincinnati, and to some extent Alabama was their toughest test down in Orlando. But they're going to have really the meat of their schedule coming up on New Year's Eve with a game at Villanova, and 48 hours later they're going to have a home game against Butler to open up their home slate in the Big East.
Yeah, we got a great start to the Big East season. We'll get to that in a couple seconds here. But David, one other team that made a little noise, and maybe not in a good way this week, was Northern Iowa. Had a bad trip out to the Diamond Head. You did a bracket today where you had them as an 8 seed based on merit to date, and I wanted to give you a chance to defend that because John S. and I both thought you were crazy.
Well, I have them correctly seeded. I just want to point that out. But they have wins. As I said in the write-up, all kidding aside, I don't really know exactly what to do with this team. They have a loss to a really weak Colorado State team. We weren't really sure about them. I think the more time that goes on, the more sure we are that they're not very good. They lost at Richmond, which is kind of forgivable. They lost pretty badly. If you watch that game, they weren't really, if I remember it, they weren't really in it for very long. Got destroyed by a New Mexico team that's also not going to be inside the bubble. I just didn't really know what to do. The Hawaii loss is not bad because Hawaii is really tough to beat at home. They had the wins over BYU and Wazoo. Or I'm sorry, they had the loss
to BYU.
Yeah, lost to BYU. Beat Wazoo. It depends on what you value. Like, their good is really good. It's as good as anybody's, and their bad is as bad as teams that we're not even looking at, much less putting in the field. I don't know. I just didn't really know what to do with them exactly.
John T., two other teams that struggled a bit this past week but came up with wins. Virginia overtime against Cal. Michigan State overtime against Oakland, although be it without Denzel Valentine. Anything you take away from either of those wins?
I take away that in crunch time, these guys are coming through. Virginia, Cal's a good team, and Virginia had beaten Villanova only 3 days earlier. They had a terrible shooting night, 39%, but they made more free throws than Cal shot, which I think is one of the signs of a veteran team with a lot of upper-class leadership. And Michigan State, they kind of got lucky. Khalil Felder drove to the hoop towards the end of regulation, got fouled, rolled it in, and it rolled out. If he makes that in the free throw, this could be the upset of the year. Instead, it's just a clutch, gutsy win by the Spartans in overtime. But Felder showed he is the real deal. He is amazing.
Yeah, well, it kind of with both games goes back to what I said earlier, which is that when you're a really good team, you find a way to win these games. I think that's exactly what Michigan State and exactly what Virginia did. Why I believe the two of the top 8 teams.
It's a little different than finding a way to beat Iowa State.
Yeah, true, but you like Oakland from what I remember from last week's Under the Radar, David. But, let's go into a bit of a preview of some of the upcoming games. Coming up tomorrow night, we have our last true batch of really good non-conference games, maybe until the Big 12 SEC Challenge at the end of January. A couple of them just really quickly include Wake Forest at LSU, Florida State at Florida, Richmond at Texas Tech, and an interesting game here is UConn at Texas. Now that Cameron Lee is out for Texas indefinitely with a foot surgery. David, do you think Texas is in trouble, and what do you think about that game tomorrow night?
Oh yeah, they're in trouble.
Okay.
And what I think about it is that they're without Cameron Lee, and they're in trouble.
Okay. Anything else for these games coming up tomorrow night? At least these non-conference games, John asked that you're looking forward to.
Yeah, I'll be curious to see if Richmond's able to make the trip into Texas Tech because of the winter weather that's been going on over in West Texas and New Mexico. Because we've already had Wichita State game against, I think it was New Mexico State that was postponed for a night.
Right. Also, starting Tuesday, we do have conference play starting as well. In the Big Ten, 2 games of note: Purdue, Wisconsin, and Michigan State, Iowa. We also have a good American Conference game, if you consider them important, of SMU Tulsa. John T., do you think SMU gets their first loss here tomorrow night?
I don't. Now that Larry Brown is back, they survived without him. The team's come together, and this is what they're built for. They're not, even if they're built for the postseason, that's not going to help them. They need to win every regular season game they can. Reminds me of that old 1954 Kentucky Wildcat team, went 25-0. They were going to go to the tourney, and Adolph Rupp said, nope, I think we're just going to sit pat. He had 3 guys who had already graduated, so the NCAA said they were ineligible. There was a lot of hullabaloo, but 25-0 is 25-0.
And David, Michigan State, do they get that loss tomorrow night heading to Iowa without Denzel Valentine?
I think so. Now, again, they're without Valentine, and it's really hard to win in Iowa, and it's a game they're really going to be up for. I don't know how many students are going to be there with it still being Christmas break, but it should be a rather rabid crowd. I do think Iowa is kind of a home court hero, and I think they win tomorrow night.
Just kind of, let's do this kind of by conference here. A couple other Big Ten games coming up over the next week. Wednesday night, Michigan, Illinois, Northwestern, Nebraska. Saturday, Michigan State's at Minnesota, and Iowa's at Purdue. John S., how about that Iowa-Purdue game? Does that raise a little bit of interest there for you?
Well, that's assuming Iowa's able to beat Michigan State, but I still think Purdue is going to come in guns a-blazing against the Hawkeyes, so... But it would be impressive if Iowa was able to go 2-0 against both Sparty and the Boilers.
John T., starting Wednesday is ACC play. I think Syracuse-Pittsburgh is the best game of the night, but let me start with another one for you here. Clemson at North Carolina. Clemson, how many times have they played a game at North Carolina? I can't actually tell you the number, but how many of those have they actually won?
I can't count that low. It is a very small number. I suppose there's a glimmer of hope with Kennedy Meeks injured. 0. That is a very low number.
They've never won. I knew they never won at the Dean Dome, but they've never won.
They've never won at North Carolina. They have beaten North Carolina on a neutral court in the state of North Carolina, but they have never won at North Carolina. Ever.
Whoa.
Ever.
Whoa. I knew the streak was
talking about goes back to the ACC tournament in the mid-'90s with Rick Barnes.
Brother, I knew the streak was approaching 60. I didn't realize it was 0-6. Oh, brother. Well, everybody has a bad 5 or 6 decades or so. Oh, God.
A couple other ACC games also coming up. On Saturday, we've got Syracuse, Miami, Notre Dame, Virginia. Sunday, Wake, Louisville. Monday, North Carolina at Florida State. David, any of these first group of ACC games that you're looking forward to other than Clemson, North Carolina?
That one's Wake, Louisville. Wake is a team that's improving, and I think they're going to continue to improve as they go on. Louisville is very good, but their paper is really weak right now. I think that's an interesting one. And I think the complexion of Louisville's profile, at least in my mind, changes quite a bit if they get that win.
John S., I got to bring you in here on the Big East. Thursday, an incredible doubleheader of games Thursday afternoon. Xavier at Villanova, followed by Providence at Butler. About as good as it gets in the Big East this year, I think.
Yep, and I think with home court holding at about a 70 to 80% clip in the Big East, I'd be surprised if Villanova and Butler didn't win their games for New Year's Eve.
And then you follow that up Saturday with Butler going to Xavier.
Yep. I mean, Xavier should win that one, but Butler's going to be gunning for the Muskies when you look at how they did last year at Cintas and also how they did in the Big East tournament, which was an overtime thriller.
Yeah, this is. I actually think Xavier goes to Villanova and wins. This is a real test. It's like Xavier is a team that we've currently both, John and I, have been projecting on our 1 lines in doing our brackets. And the question is, I mean, to get that 1 seed, you have to beat a protected seed on the road, it seems. And I think Xavier can do it. I think that they are better in the post than Villanova. I think Villanova relies on outside shooting, and that Xavier's a very good defensive team. I think that there's teams that will beat Xavier at home, but I think Xavier goes in and gets it done this week at Nova.
Well, the reason I think they might have a chance is because when you look at how they matched up with Matt Stainbrook in the post the past couple of years, the game where Xavier actually did the best was when Stainbrook was injured his freshman year, and they had Reynolds starting at the post, and they were pretty competitive at home against the Wildcats, but still weren't able to come out on top.
Yeah.
John T., Pac-12 play starts on New Year's Day on Friday. Notable game to me, I think, on the first day is the Colorado at Cal game, and then a few really good games on Sunday, including, I know the game you want to talk about, the Arizona State round one.
Ding, ding. Yeah, it's going to be great. Unfortunately, the ASU's beaten my Wildcats in Tempe each of the past 2 years, so I have to admit I'm nervous. Even more so because when Caleb Tarczewski hurt his ankle, it was initially sprained ankle 4 to 6 weeks. New reports, stress reaction, and strained muscle, so very nervous, but hopefully we can reverse history from the past couple of years.
And a couple other games to note, though. Oregon State, and Utah at Cal also coming up on Sunday.
Yeah.
I think that those could be a couple of really good Pac-12 games.
It really is, and how turned around is Oregon State? Are they all the way to the tournament yet, or I don't know, we'll see.
David, finally, over in the Big 12, actually the SEC gets started on Saturday, no really big notable games, but in the Big 12 starting on Saturday as well, and the way the Big 12 is this year, I think that almost every game could be a monster game.
Yeah.
But let me read off the Saturday's schedule from the Big 12. Texas at Texas Tech, Baylor at Kansas, West Virginia at Kansas State, and Iowa State at Oklahoma. That's just the first day of Big 12 play.
Yeah.
How insane is this conference going to be this year?
It's going to be great. It's going to be awesome, really. And this is just I love the out-of-conference portion of the season. I like a lot of the intriguing matchups that you don't normally see. But now that all the cupcakes are eaten, it's time for the meat. And again, this is just one of the best conferences with the rivalry that exists here and the quality of play. I mean, Baylor, those are just great games, and you're telling yourself that every night the Big 12 plays, it seems.
Right. And after Kansas hosts Baylor and Oklahoma hosts Iowa State on Saturday, Monday is the season premiere of Big Monday, featuring our triple header of Big East, Big Ten, and Big West. I'm sorry, ACC and Big 12 basketball. But John T., it starts off with a bang, though. Oklahoma at Kansas on Monday night, coming out off of them each hosting Baylor and Iowa State.
It's so big, we're previewing it a week in advance. They are
that's
two
how
of the
big
top
it is.
offenses in the nation. Not only could it be the game of the year, it's the biggest game in this rivalry since they met in the title game in '88. Lon Kruger grew up in Kansas. He played at Kansas State. He coached at Kansas State. He's gone 93-49 since 2011. He's been to the tourney 3 of the 4 years. He has won 0 Big 12 titles because of the team he faces next Monday. You think he wants to beat the Jayhawks?
As we sit here right now in the Ken Pom ratings, number 1 Oklahoma, number 2 Kansas. I think that says a lot about this game coming up here. But on that note, any final thoughts? Let me start with you, John S.
Yeah, John T. just made me nostalgic there when he mentioned Kansas and Oklahoma in 1988 when Billy Tubbs was coaching the Sooners. Because I think it was Lamar that they played and had beaten by a wide margin that he was rumored to ask them, can we play you guys again next year for a bye game too?
Wow.
David.
Oh, man, I just, again, it's been kind of crazy with all the weather, and I know that people's travel's been affected, teams' travel has been affected, and, again, I know it's just out of character for me to say this, but I hope everybody stays safe out there and that their holidays weren't jacked up too much.
And John T.
So my New Year's resolution is that we're going to have a little more parity this year in the Final Four. Last year, 3-1 seeds with Kentucky, Wisconsin, and Duke, and the Spartans as the outsider with the 7th seed, despite a Hall of Fame coach in Tom Izzo. This year, I think we've seen there is no one great team. There's been injuries, there's been upsets, there's been rough schedules in non-conference play, and then some big conferences, like you said, the Big 12 coming up. So I don't think we're going to see anyone like an undefeated Kentucky team, and I don't think we're going to see a bunch of number 1 seeds in the Final Four this March.
I agree. I think we've got a great rest of the season that really gets started this time of year now that we're getting into conference play. By next Saturday, I think everybody outside of the Ivy League and maybe the Atlantic Sun is going to be into conference play, and within 2 weeks, everybody will be there. But I'm real excited for it, but I do want to wish everybody a happy and healthy new year. We will be talking to you again real soon.